What's up, guys?
What's up?
Hello.
Glad we got together to do this finally. Only took like 3 months, or I don't know when we first started chatting about scheduling this.
Yeah, what I wanted to bring out the really great conversation we could have about fire and analytics and how that meets the world of relational. Tuva is trying to democratize healthcare analytics. Why don't we start?
Yeah, I think most people know me and Phil. Aaron Neiderhiser, co-founder of Tuva. Phil leads
Yeah.
data engineering for Atropos Health.
Yep.
What are you up to these days, Gene?
Lots of stuff, just having fun. I am building with Claude like everybody else.
Yeah, and to follow on what you said, I mean, the reason we were excited about that, we haven't really done a podcast yet where we've talked. I think we've talked about fire here and there, but I think this is like the all fire podcast, right?
Kinda.
And I'm
Yeah.
I'm probably, in terms of the three of us, I'm probably the least qualified to talk about. I know a little bit about what's going on. Gene, you probably know the most. Phil, you're probably somewhere in the middle. And so I think it's going to be, we're going to get into fire and probably with a little bit of an analytics bent because to your point, Gene, that's how I look at the world, right? It's like what questions are we actually answering with the data? So, but maybe just to kick it off, Gene, you I think gave a talk today, or you're going to give a talk about some work that you did around fire and CQ and making it easier to convert CQL to SQL. So and I thought that was really interesting. I posted it in the Tuva Slack kind of late because I just saw it, I think last night or this morning, but maybe some people were able to see it and join. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. So maybe we could start. You could like give an overview of like what that was and
Yeah. So the SQL on Fire conference actually is the second year they've been having it, and I joined earlier this year. I started attending the SQL on Fire working group. So it's kind of just a bunch of guys that meet every week pretty much. One of them is Arjun. He's a really great guy. And we have this conference that they put on every year. And so I'm giving the talk actually tomorrow in the morning. So obviously this podcast will probably not be out at that point. That will probably already would have happened. So go check it out, what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. But basically, the gist of it is that in the fire world, the analytics are not easy to do because it's JSON. JSON's crappy to run analytics on. REST APIs were not made for data aggregation and doing all kinds of things with it. So there's all kinds of interesting things that the SQL on Fire working group is working on. We're coming up with a standard way to kind of flatten fire. And there's were actually really cool presentations today, which was the first day of the conference. And you could go check those out. Like Josh Kelly did a presentation on why it actually is very recommended to use for LLMs and tokenizing your fire data because, as you know, it's the more data you have to process, the more expensive it's going to be. So he actually had like a really cool use case. But honestly, all the presentations are really awesome. And so my whole topic and agenda for tomorrow, or would have happened already, whoever's watching this, is CQL, which is designed as a clinical quality language for fire to standardize and make interoperable the clinical logic component. So for a long, long time, the problem in healthcare analytics has been, HEDIS, particularly HEDIS measures. They were published as just a narrative specification. There's hundreds of organizations out there. They either have to pay a vendor to build those measures and maintain those data warehouses, right? And then everybody kind of interprets the specs differently. So what CQA wants to do is get away from that and have one single set of code that kind of interprets using standard data representation like a FHIR model, and then be able to just give that code to everybody, and then you can run it. Well, the problem is it's really hard to run CQL. The standard is kind of like trying to reinvent a new thing, and it's not easy and not very performant. And so there's been lots of people putting a lot of effort into it over the last couple of years. There's a whole community of kind of people that are working on it currently. There's been a lot of work done. I don't want to say anything bad about it because I think there is still a need for that. But ultimately, if you want people to use CQL, let's do the easy, or maybe not the easy thing, but the common sense thing, which is convert it to SQL. And we've been running HEDIS measures on SQL for years, years, and years. So we have a lot of people that know how to build SQL measures and how to make them performant, how to troubleshoot them. And really, what we can do is we can use CQL as that really standards-based specification logic a component. So essentially your requirements document for your CQL measure. And so my demo tomorrow at this conference is doing that with the help of LLMs, converting using a standardized set of prompts and inputs, and then running that in Databricks and basically being able to utilize that immediately without needing a CQL engine or anything else. So
And will all these talks be available online afterwards, I'm guessing, like on
yes,
the conference website or somewhere?
yeah, there's a YouTube channel, I believe, and the conference is actually sponsored and put on by the Health Samurai guys, and Reason Health is the other company. So, and they have a YouTube for it. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm
That's
definitely gonna
awesome.
check out a bunch of those. So one thing I like really agree strongly with and what you're saying, and one of the reasons I was attracted to this, basically the idea of your talk is like the that CQL, the big difficulty of it is the execution. And I agree with that pretty strongly, and I think the reason I agree with that most strongly is for better or for worse, the lingua franca of, like, data analytics is SQL, right? And so you have all these data people that it's like, "Hey, if it's in a database, I know what to do with it." And then if you give them really any sort of technology that, like, is like could be like a Java program or like anything other than that. It's kind of like, wait, what do I do with this? Right. And so yeah, I think that's why you've seen, measures be written in SQL. One question I had for you is why don't we just use SQL as the language? Like, why do we need CQL? Is there a benefit to having? I know that's the direction, like maybe the train has kind of left the station, right? And it's going to be CQL for better for worse. But in a different universe, would it be a better alternative just to have like, English language documentation of how the measures, are intended to work, and then the code representation of that is just SQL?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and I think that it potentially is more difficult to write the requirements in SQL. The only reason I say that is that because you can do things like define which value set this particular measure is using. You can list out the values, you can have stored procedures, you can have various lists, right? So there's like in CQL, there's really like one way that it's done, and the way it's represented is very easy. Like use this. It's almost like the whole CTE thing where use this CTE for this, and it automatically knows where to go and look. And so behind the scenes, it's actually writing this ELM representation, which is what CQL uses right behind it as the code, but it's much more wordy. But the layer that you can use to define those requirements is actually, I think it is actually simpler than writing the same thing in SQL, for example, because you
In
would have to
SQL?
like write out either you have to create a whole bunch of store procedures, you have to like list out all the values in this list, a value set. So there's elegant ways that it's been designed to like define a value set or which value set. Then it has the whole structure of FIRE, which allows it to basically say it's a condition, and then here's the code in the condition that you compare, right? So it's you don't have to have this whole kind of additional structure to say. Many people probably say conditions can be defined differently between different healthcare organizations, but FIRE really gives us one. If you're using something like US Core, and then with CQL, you can say it's using that condition. Everybody knows what that means. So I say that's the biggest like pros of it.
And so, like, conceptually, CQL, like, when you're defining a measure in CQL, it's almost like with conceptually, it's almost like writing it in English with kind of a specific syntax, but like a layperson could kind of read the measure and understand what it's trying to do. And then that gets compiled down to the executable version of it, which that's like the ELM that you were talking
Yeah.
about. And that is that executable, the data model, I'm using quotes if you're just air quotes if you're just listening to us, the data model that ELM executable version is programmed against, that's fire. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to jump in, so it sounds like, my jumping off point with fire was a long time ago. I got very excited about it because I was like, This is great. Never going to have to do another source to target mapping doc again. We can all just agree on this model."
Never again.
And yeah, I've never done one since 2019. Never, not even one time. But I think we all saw that with analytics in particular. I've been on the analytics side the whole time, so I know that there's a lot of use of fire on the operational side in terms of like exchanging patient records and all the stuff at Bewell, and other things like it. But from the analytics side, felt like it was lagging for a long time, both because of the mechanism in terms of how you would even obtain the data, but then also, this issue of like working with the data as an object as opposed to flat relational data. So like what it seems like maybe, and from our from I read some of the stuff that you were writing and also just from my general sense of what's going on in the industry, seems like maybe the dam is kind of breaking now on the analytics side, and maybe we're kind of coming up out of the trough of disillusion or whatever part of the curve that is, specifically with respect to analytics and fire. And so I'm just curious, like I haven't done frankly that much with fire in the analytics space because it was kind of lagging for so long. Kept my eye on it, did some stuff in my grad program, et cetera. But from your perspective, like, do you feel that's true? And then also, like, what is causing now, at long last, maybe what's different now that is causing fire in the analytics space to maybe become more viable and really break through those barriers?
Yeah. So like first and foremost, I want to give a shout out to the SQL on Fire folks. They have been meeting basically every year, every week for now over a year, 2 years to try to come up with this specification. And what that specification does is it really just it gives you a computable representation of the fire resources in a flattened format, right? So it kind of takes that deeply nested structure, it takes all those things and creates something called a view definition. And the view definition is something with the help of a view runner, which is basically like a execution engine, right? That you just have in SQL. You can basically create views in Fire. So you take that structure and you flatten it. And then this is something that then you can standardize and share. And then we've talked about there's implementation guides that are published, for example, by ONC for US Core, right? USCDI, which are supposed to be the standards for interoperability for the United States. Well, what we can do is we can actually publish these view definitions, which gives you a really simple way to take this fire resource and now you can flatten it to a database very easily with a SQL runner. So basically, from like my experience, every organization has done that themselves anyway. I've talked to maybe like 10 different companies over the last year that have built their own flattening pipelines, right? They say, oh, okay, well, what do you mean? We can just use, and it's really complex and
We built one in the Tuva
sure.
project. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, but it's really complex and it doesn't like cover all the use cases. And then you end up with what, I had in our, data marts, which every file resource basically becomes a data mart with like 30 or 40 tables, which is like, oh, wait a second, this is really crappy and hard to work with. So instead, you can create these view definitions and then you can create the views on basically, hey, this is the data that I actually need. I don't need these like 10,000 different nested elements of the base resource that nobody ever uses anyway, right? US Core, like it's how many data elements are we actually even getting when we're connecting to these EMRs? Not a lot, right? Like we're getting like maybe we're lucky if we get the codes and all the associated data, right? So the point is, I think it's like the whole market has matured to your point, Phil, and like there's a lot of people that have been working on this problem. And now actually, I think with AI and LLMs, and we're able to iterate a lot quicker too. So like what I'm presenting and what I'm trying to show as a path forward is, first of all, we can have agents build the CQL that basically defines certain logical elements in FHIR format. We can take that, run it through to convert to SQL, use view definitions to flatten that data, and then we can have really like runnable analytics almost like immediately downstream, right? And then you could even integrate all of that into your existing system, your existing analytics schemas, and without having to reinvent the wheel for the 10,000th time. Like every organization has done, they have these pipelines that run and flatten all the data. Like hopefully you won't need to do that as much anymore because you're taking the analytics use case you want and need, having agents write all of that code for you.
When
With
when
the
I
view definition, sorry,
no,
just
go
really
ahead, Phil.
quickly,
Yeah.
because I'm better at thinking about this just in terms of concrete examples. So you get a bunch of fire from somewhere, you're keeping it in your object storage. I would imagine that, hope. Do you see most people getting like whole bundles of like patient bundles, or are we to the point where we can do like bulk fire? Like, give me all the procedures at once, give me all the observations at once, give me all of the et cetera, like at once. Like, has that kind of landscape changed? Because I feel like that was the biggest initial hurdle for a long time, is like even just getting a ton of fire out for analytics.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the other side of it as well, is that it's not just getting the definitions of how you translate fire to this relational structure. It's also actually pulling it out in a performant, scalable like way, which honestly, there's a lot of work that has been happening with bulk fire, and that there's a spec that is out there. But like if you try to connect to a particular instance of Epic to a particular health system, it's not going to work great, and it's not going to work the same way from one to another, depending on what they've enabled, what they support, and what they don't support, right? So that's where it's a hard problem to solve, because some EHR vendors are better at it than others, and have enabled it. Others have not. So we're kind of like in this situation where we're prisoners of the still, and I think that's the large problem, that we still have EHR vendors controlling access to data, right?
Is CMS BCDA the way you can get Medicare claims? You're familiar with this, Gene? The
Yeah, the blue
BCDA
button.
in
Yeah,
is that for ACOs, the is that an instance of is that a bulk fire API?
I believe so, but
It must be, because the intent of it is like basically CMS is saying you can get bulk fire, or you can get all of the Medicare claims for the patients in your ACO through the BCDA endpoint. And so
right.
it's intended to be my understand, or maybe tell me if this is true. A traditional fire server is designed to transact information about a single patient or maybe a small number of patients, right? So I want the information on Aaron, and I want these resources about Aaron, like upcoming appointments, conditions, medications, stuff like that. A bulk fire server is going to transact the same JSON objects, the same resources, but for a very large population, ostensibly,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And you're supposed to be able to like define that population. So you're like, instead of like, give me everything, you're like, okay, there's a thing called group, and like you define that group. So you can say group of ACO number 126 or whatever. And that defines all the patients that are in that group. So that group resource is kind of like a long list of,
And so,
it's basically a roster.
for the longest time, you had, or when this like EHRs and other organizations first started setting up fire servers back in the late, I don't know when it was, probably like mid-teens or something, like 2015 and 2016 is right, maybe when you
Yeah.
started to see it a little more. I don't know. They were really setting up just like kind of the N of one fire, the one patient at a time fire server. And then you didn't even really have the way to extract. You couldn't use a group or something to extract a larger, or even if you did have some way where you're trying to get all the data out, it could crash the server because it just wasn't designed for that sort of scale. But now you're starting to see things like CMS's beneficiary claims data API that allow for that larger scale extraction. And so you are like within users of Tuva, there's a bunch of people using that endpoint to get claims data from CMS, and you can get it faster than the old CCLF flat files. And but I don't. Do you know of any other like? Who else would you point to as having like a bulk file, like being kind of a leader in transacting population scale data with Fire? Anyone?
So pretty much all the EHR vendors support it. So like you have Epic and you have Athena and you have Meditech, but you need to obviously work with a particular health system to make sure that they can enable that, right? So it's the same problem that we've had that you just described, where you have a CSV file, right? That's been generated. You drop it on an FTP site, and people pick it up, right? So 90% of the data is transacted that way. I just had a podcast episode with Michael Westover the other month, and he literally like brought up the same use case. Like that's the way that we just interoperate data in healthcare right now. So to get away from that, but you need to have willing participants to say, hey, wait a second, do you even have the expertise on the health system side to enable the things that, do they even know that those things exist? That you can even you can bulk fire the data instead of creating another CSV extract that your analyst has to write a custom Epic query, right, to pull out. So there's a lot of like education, but then there's also like resourcing constraints. Like they don't have anybody that knows that. And Epic is like, well, here's documentation and you guys are on the right version of Fire. Or so it really is dependent on that. Like I'm sure as you guys run into that all the time, especially with two, right? If you have the right resources, you can probably stand up things very quickly.
And maybe to jump back to SQL on Fire. So if I just trying to make sense of it. So if I wanted to, like after this call, let's say I have a bunch of synthetic Fire data on my desktop, could I load it into Snowflake just as JSON and use SQL on Fire from there? Or how would I get started with SQL on Fire?
So you can use, I think, Health Samurai actually has a view definition builder. So you can go in there and define what you want to essentially, how do you want to flatten that Fire resource? So let's say you want the patients, but in your Snowflake, you only want to store their demographic data and you don't care about like all the nested elements, everything else. So you go and you build that view definition.
And then does the Health Samurai, but it's not actually flattening the data into CSVs, and I load those CSVs into Snowflake, or it is.
You want to have this, you need the runner that will take and do that for you, essentially. So what I've done with Databricks is I've just kind of passed through views that I've created, and I said like, hey, just load these data elements that I need into Databricks, and essentially that's what it does. So then I can write, SQL statements that use those. Uh,
But is it, I guess, or maybe let's try and ask it a little more clearly. Are you actually creating CSVs or flat files that get loaded in the database, or is it just a view that is then passing instructions back to some runner that is then going back to the JSON and converting it more in real time? Does that make sense?
I believe it's just like, again, you're retrieving, SQL, you check the syntax, and then you produce a table-like output that you can do whatever you want with. So it's like
But the
basically, yeah.
But what Health Samurai's tool lets you do, it sounds like you can specify the data elements are important so that you don't have these views that are like, more columns than the number of atoms in the known universe or something crazy
Right.
like
And
that.
that's
It's like,
that's the benefit of it, right? And it's also making you like critically think about what you're actually using or not, like, right? And it's like the way that people have done flattening for fires that, oh, we need everything fire because we don't know when we're going to need something, right? And then they realize they spend more time flattening data than they do anything else or actually running analytics, right? So you're just like flipping that on its head and you're saying, I'm going to define a view, which is basically going to be the contract of what I want to run my analytics on. Instead of just saying, give me everything that could possibly ever come through, or whatever this is the important stuff I actually need. And then like what
I
I was
guess.
actually, yeah.
Sorry, I was just like on that point. I guess I can go against my informatics background for a second here and play devil's advocate. What if I just want everything? Like, what if I don't know what I want? And what if I just you know, I have access and I'm not sure what I really want in the future. I just want to get all the data out. I want it somewhere where my analysts can easily access it. And my problem right now is that I have to go through that process in the traditional method of like talking to analysts, here's giving them a spec, setting
Yeah,
up
it's
an
like the old school
SFTP.
ETL.
Like, yeah, like what if I just am trying to solve the access problem? Is there, it sounds like, and I've used Health Samurai before, and seems like a great tool. It's been a while. I'm sure they have even more features now. But like, how does this solve that particular problem? Like, I just want all the data out, and I want it with SQL
So you can
capabilities.
absolutely create those view definitions that like just take everything in the resource and be like, but you need to have that definition first of what it is, right? So you're like fire is really this like giant spec that's like this huge
Yeah,
baseline
huge.
foundation, right? So it's like
Yeah,
building a house. You want to first figure out what it is, what kind of house you want to build, right? So then let's say you want to use the US core definition of the patient. You can absolutely go in and create a view definition based on this profile, US core patient profile. And that's actually something that I think like I want to partner with people to do because I think that would help a lot of people is if we just had those available for everybody. So then to your point, you don't have to like create your own. You can just download the view definitions for US Core
yeah.
for all the resources, and boom, you got the latest definition of all these resources. And then you can just run them and you have everything available on a flattened table. So, yeah, absolutely.
I wonder how similar the view definitions for US core would be to the clinical data tables in the Tuva core data model. Because we like the way we designed those clinical tables is we started by just looking at the fire resources and looking at USCDI and being like, well, this stuff seems important, right? So like, I mean, we added stuff here and there, but they're basic like that. They're largely inspired by that. I wonder how similar it is.
Yeah, probably. It is just like I've looked at Tuva and I've played with Tuva for a while, and it's a really good representation. So I don't think there's going to be probably a large disconnect between, unless it's something that has literally like changed where they updated it for the new year. You know, like something as complex as labs where there's like 10 different profiles in the observation resource. And it might have changed in the last 2 years where they added something. So then you would have like 10 different tables that you would have to like reconcile differently. But ultimately, the structure in Firely doesn't change that often. So
That
we've been
actually,
on,
that kind of brings me maybe to a slightly like wider conversation, which it's, I hesitate to call it a bone to pick or anything, but like something that I've struggled with thinking about fire being kind of like the solution for a lot of these problems is that, for me at least, all of this business around the profiles and the core and the R5, R6, the use or non-use of extensions, like I like to imagine myself as a fairly, capable person, and I like to imagine that I know a fair amount about health data. Yeah, opinions certainly can differ. It probably varies from day to day quite a bit. But whenever I've gone into this space with fire, and I have gone into it to some degree, I feel like my brain is too small for this. And I'm curious, like, from your perspective, have we now gotten past that degree of confusion? Is everyone actually using whatever core R, whatever that somebody told them to? Like, cause like from my perspective as a very small brain, integration, focused person, I just want everything to be the same and I want to be able to go out and get it easily. So like, are we there yet? Are we at the Amazon level? Can I put it in the cart? Can I get 2-day shipping on my fire resources?
yeah, I mean, I would love to say yes, but I say like we're getting there. And like, had a
Where
pleasure
do
of,
the differences come from? Where do
well,
all the differences come from? The fact
and
that
this
there
is
is
the
flex.
thing. This is the thing. So, like people that created Fire, which is, Graham Grieve, I had a chance to meet him in person at the fire camp. in Portugal just recently in September, and he actually talked about this as one of the original kind of sins of fire is that, you could either make things very specific or you could make them like really open, right? And they specifically made those things like really open because they were trying to, I think, have it be flexible enough and ability to serve many different use cases. So I think again, I am I have not been in the Fire community as long as some people have. Like you have people like Gino Canessa there with Microsoft, Josh Mundell. Those are like originators Fire, and that's their full-time job. And they can tell you from like 2018, 2019. I mean, the Fire's been around since 2011, but really the normative version came out like probably 2019. And there's a lot of progress that has been made to standardizing. So basically, what they announced at the Fire Camp conference was that for R6, which is the current version that's being worked on. So basically, we're skipping a version. It's like Windows 95, 98, 2000, where everybody went directly to like Windows 2000 or something, whatever. So it's the same thing with Fire because everybody's on R4, which is basically like the Windows 95, and nobody's adopting R5, which is like whatever it is, Windows 97 or whatever. And then
98,
we're
yeah.
going directly to R6, which is now being finalized. And they're putting a lot of effort into making sure that like the resources that are in R6 are all going to be normative, and there's not going to be all of these things that are trial use still and things that because really they've realized that like what's the point of doing that because people are not going to want to use those because they could change in the future. So let's just like make everything normative and put everything else in these implementation guides for people if they want to go and use a bunch of these experimental features or maybe something that's not been vetted. So I think you'll see a lot of hopefully people adopting now R6 that are on R4 because it is going to make life easier for a lot of people where you want to use some
Yeah.
of those advanced features also like subscriptions is something that like is not in really R4 that is a very much needed feature so that people don't have to keep calling those APIs every 7 days to get new data. You'll just get a notification, hey, this patient has new data, just go get it. All right. So like that kind of stuff is going to be a lot easier. But the things you guys brought up are exactly like some of the things that everybody has very like deep discussions and a lot of like, why did we do it? Did we, now we have this proliferation of implementation guides as well. So like 10 different profiles on something that really should just be one way of interpreting certain type of data, right?
Well, just as an aside, my first computer had Windows ME on it, which I think was the best operating system we've yet seen, and I would trade every Windows since then to go
I
definitely.
had
So that sounds it almost sounds like there's a sort of Uber style thing happening where you start your standard really open to get people onto the platform, i.e. the price is really low. And then after everybody's on, you jack the price up or, like in this case, maybe kick everybody off if they won't standardize things. But in this case, what's actually going to make people I mean, you're saying like people aren't going from they're not really going to 5. What's going to make people actually go to 6, especially if they're giving up all this like heterogeneity that they've built into for themselves?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I honestly I don't know because like
Could it
honestly a
could
lot of people don't they invested a
could
lot of effort into just rolling out R4.
Yeah.
could it be just the EHR certification process? Could that be the version
Yeah, I
be
mean,
written
I
into
think
it?
the regulations drive a lot of it. So
Yeah.
like if US Core now starts mandating, and I think they released a statement that they will not allow the Windows XP and Windows 95. They're like Windows 95 is going to have to go away at some point, not going to be supported anymore. So like they're going to say like we're going to have it be based on R6, like future versions, let's say 2027, 2028, or whenever yeah, are going to be, and if US Core is saying that, that means that all the EHRs are going to have to be compliant with that. So all the APIs that you're going to have in Epic are going to be compliant with that. So you're going to have a system that can, at the very minimum, store that data in R6, right, format. So, but there's different ways now also that is a little easier to do than it has been in the past. like there's this whole fire facade concept, which is basically like you're not physically storing that data in the salient fire, but you have like a layer on top that's almost like a facade that you're in, virtualizing it or whatever you want to call it as fire resources. So there could be solutions that do that for the versions and stuff, et cetera. But
With all the improvements that have been happening to SQL on Fire, should healthcare data teams think about using Fire as their common data model?
that's a really good question. What do you guys think?
I think for me, it would depend on how normative, like, so if I'm thinking about getting data from a bunch of different people, I need there to be commonality. Like if I'm gonna switch from getting my CSVs in different shapes from everyone and then doing my own data model, and if I want to just destroy all that and go out and get something, I want there to be as much standardization of whatever that is as possible. And then also I want it to be easy to get, right? Like that's kind of the table stakes. It could be the most standard thing in the world. If I can't get it, then it doesn't matter. But if I can get it, I want it to be really standard. And, if that did exist and then it was easy to flatten so that I can not have to convince a bunch of people to think about nested data structures that haven't before and I can plug it into R or whatever, then yeah, that sounds great. But what I'd be concerned about is, A, there's always the heterogeneity of the data underneath. And B, there's the heterogeneity of what version of Fire and stuff people are using, and then how they're like piping that in. My understanding of how you actually get from like the data in Clarity or whatever the equivalent for Cerner is, my understanding of how that even becomes a Fire object is very limited. And so
Yep.
I'm curious, like from your perspective, you know, um, how is that kind of happening? Or like is there is there a ton of hidden heterogeneity there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And like your answer is like, I think right on the money though, in terms of like how do you decide that is you really have to understand like what type of data are you talking about, right? If you're talking about data that is you do want to exchange it, and then you also want to like go to all of the data providers on the market. So let's say we start talking about Tefkas and McEwen's, and we're talking
Yeah.
about these networks and other players that are, supposed to be making their data available, and the single format really is Fire, right? So if you're looking to get lab values or you're looking to get conditions, I would highly support, yeah, like try to at least use that as a baseline, and then you can customize, like you can add things that you have that nobody else might have, and you can like extend, right? You can extend that that definition, but at least like try to align it so that there's certain commonality to it from the way that it's represented. But then there are certain things that are not even in Fire. And then your other question is in terms of how does that data even get into Fire? Is like, you're absolutely right. Like Clarity, what is it? Has like 50,000, 60,000 tables in Epic. And it's like, we're pulling out maybe, I don't know, 1/10 of that into these Fire resources, which probably is not even that much. And then there's, first of all, yeah, like what's required to be shared is probably like just a portion of the patient's medical record in the first place. So, right. So that doesn't answer every different use case. And then whatever is pulled out goes through a certain level of mapping and transformation that somebody at Epic has decided based on the things that they know about, right? And does that like neatly all compile? Absolutely not. And that's why you still need to like worry about data quality and your semantic, normalization, your terminology, organization. So there's all that enrichment that nobody's doing, right? So like you unfortunately as the consumer have to be aware of all that stuff.
So here's the tough thing for me, in thinking about using Fire as the common data model. So ultimately, we want to get the data in a relational format because analytics is relational thinking. Like at the end of the day, somebody's doing a data analysis, somebody's building a dashboard, somebody's training a machine learning model. We're talking a data frame or maybe a couple data tables to power a dashboard or something like that. And all the data people, like we talked about earlier, their language of choice is SQL. So we got to get the data in a relational format. And this SQL on Fire, the improvements to SQL on Fire, right? Sounds like that has come a long way. maybe it mostly solves the problem of getting fire into the relational format. But here's the tough thing for me is the majority of data that data teams are accessing today, if you look across all the EHR feeds that data teams get access to, all the claims data sets, the ancillary lab data, it's already coming in relational format. And so we want to get it in a relational format. It's tough for me to go to the data team and be like, hey, you know how we're getting a couple things in Fire. Fire's a standard, obviously. We want to get it to a relational format. These other, you know how we're getting 80% of the other data is coming in a relational format? Let's convert that back to Fire before we pull it back into the and the JSON objects, the Fire objects. Yeah, there's going to be people on the team that are skilled enough to do with that, but not the lowest common denominator of from a skill standpoint on the team. Again, is like relational tables or relational files and SQL. And so I think that's the tough thing for me. I think where that starts to flip for me is if over time data sharing moves more and more toward Fire, and if it starts to go from less than 20% of the data sources are coming in as Fire and 80% as flat, if that inverts, then I think maybe the calculus starts to change there a little bit.
Just
Yeah.
to go off of that, like, I think, yeah, maybe it's the acquisition that it kind of solves. Because, like, yes, we are getting 80% now, more and more, just flat files, but the process by which you have to go through to set that up is so bad
Yeah, it's
that
really
if
bad.
you could just get rid of that and
That's the
get,
commercial
like,
for Fire. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, "Hey, do you just I just want a giant dump truck of data to show up to my house without going through 19
Right.
weeks of, like, kickoff and back and forth and all that stuff." But in order to do that, I need to know that the dump truck will actually have in it the mulch that I ordered and not, like, a bunch of broken glass or, like, be empty or have, like, nuclear waste inside it, right? So, like, how do we get that assurance? And then maybe, but then we could build something on top of it that we need. We don't have to use Fire as the back end of our application or something.
I don't even know that you were bringing up like a bunch of data quality points there with your nuclear waste. I don't even know that data quality is the real problem there because like oftentimes you get a claims data feed from somebody as a bunch of CSVs and the claims data quality is not good. Right. So I wouldn't necessarily quibble about the data quality. I literally think it's just the administrative mechanism like most, that like if you're getting data from a health plan or a TPA or just really talking about claims data here, right? If you're getting claims data from a plan or a payer or a TPA on behalf of an employer or maybe a employer directly, like 9,999 times out of 10,000, it's coming as a set of CSVs over an SFTP. And I think if administratively, what is the will to like shift that? If all of a sudden you snapped your fingers overnight and then that's Fire and there's like a solution for auth and access and auth, right? That is like a so you're not just like emailing the IT team and not having your emails responded to. And they could just give you access to a bulk Fire server and your permissions are you have
Scoped.
only access to the data one. You can ping it and you can set up a pipeline to pull on some frequencies. But wow, right? Like that's a big that solves what internally we've come to call the Larry problem, which is like, Larry at every company that has claims data, Larry is responsible for managing the claims data and sending out claims data feeds. And Larry smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day and takes 3 lunches and he's just never at his desk. Right. And so it's, these data requests go unfulfilled for it can take weeks to do something that should take 5 minutes. Right. And
I think
that's
I like to have more sympathy for Larry because because I used to work in a health system IT. I like to think that Larry has
well, his name
700
was Phil.
tickets. Yeah,
His
his
name
name
was
was
Phil.
Phil, and he had 700 tickets assigned to him, and 3 hours of meetings a day, that mandatory attendance, bunch of tickets in the queue ahead. Um, Gene, just to go back to the, like, flight path forward, because I agree with you that I think that I was what you wrote, that I reviewed earlier about how AI kind of can impact this. I definitely agree with that. Like perhaps a really useful thing about fire is that it does, a fire feed from one health system versus another, from Epic versus Cerner, from Meditech, different versions, all these things. Those things look much more different from one another than fire does, even though fire has differences. Like fire does kind of bring you to like a shelling point on the map of like, hey, we kind of know what this is. And LLMs know about that, even without adding a bunch of docs, which you can totally do, right? Like you could just download the entire spec for R6 and put it in the context window every single time you're asking a question. So, could you elaborate on how you see that kind of impact things? Because I have some ideas, but I think you being much closer to fire may have much more insight there.
But yeah, I mean, it's a great question. By the way, we were all Larry, I think, at some point.
It's not Larry.
So
That's why I
no,
make
all
fun of
right.
Larry.
Oh,
Aaron was the
but
unsympathetic customer.
anyway, so I think that yes, I think it's going to be a while until we see that like future of like the Amazon, or the example that I like to bring up is like the Plaid of healthcare. So like how Plaid is out there as a service that connects all of these endpoints with different banks and different financial institutions. And we're on our way to trying to get to that point. And right now, there are some like really cool organizations. Like we got FlexBall, we got Fasten Health, and if you guys know of them, but like we have, you know, Health Gorilla. We have all of these people that are trying to aggregate data, right? But there's really not one plaid. That's the problem. Like you still have to go, if you want data from all these different areas, you still have to go and like you have to contract with like a whole bunch of different orgs, right? And then like if you go to individual health systems, like God help you, it's going to take you years to get every single health system in the US, right? There's like a few people that have been doing that for years and they still don't have everybody. So I think, yeah, that future is possible, but like just because we have APIs and we have bulk fire and we have like off solved, it still doesn't solve it because you still have to go, there's manual, Larry problems because Larry has now gotten promotion and he's now approving the API requests for Epic, right? So he's not no longer sending you the CSV, but he's still the guy that approves, and he usually takes a couple of weeks to get back to you. So on the question about AI, I think it's definitely like a big force multiplier, like just like with this project that I've been working on using MCP and basically have agents that are already aware of all of these MCP endpoints that, you need to do this, you need to get this, here's where you go, here's the information I need to get it. I think that opens up like a huge amount of use cases that I really think is the way everything's going to be done in the future, just because like everybody's going to want to interact with an AI, uh, whether you're a developer or you're an analyst or you're a consumer at the end of the day of some analytics product, you're gonna have an AI that you're interacting with, right? And so the fact that everything's kind of like enabled out of the box with MCP, and there's obviously like agent to agent and other frameworks out there, that a lot of these use cases can be operationalized with a lot less like just grunt work that for years and years you've seen like how long does it take to create a dashboard in a large organization that actually has all the data that's needed? Probably months, because they first have to build you the diff tables to get all the data together, right? Then you have to have somebody build you the dashboard. Then they have to build you whatever like access to. So all of that stuff can be automated with agents. In my hope, I don't know if you know how soon that's going to happen, and I think there's a role for people to play. I don't think it's like replacing everyone's job, but it's going to make everybody focus on like what the value add of your job is, as opposed to just hitting schedule on the CSV extract or building a chart on a dashboard that like an LLM can really do probably better job at that than I can if I just give it the right context window and the right prompt and MCP endpoints that it has to go to get the data.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm guessing we probably got to wrap here in a minute or so. Curious, Gene and Phil, any major predictions for what where things are going with fire and in the next year? Anything that's anything that that you're excited about?
I'll let you start, Gene.
Obviously, I'll say the 0057 stuff that everybody's been talking about. I don't know if you guys have listen too much into that, but that's like the prior off stuff that there's a requirement 1/1/2027. So there's a lot of work happening so we'll see what happens with that. If organizations are actually going to be ready or not. There are a bunch of solutions on the market for that, but basically that enables that communication between providers and payers for the approval and the data that they need to make the approval, and then the medical guidelines that they need. So there's a lot of things that have to go right for that, but that's like probably the biggest thing. But there's the whole thing with NCQA and the quality measures and all of that. We'll see how that kind of matures and where we go. Will they actually make that acceptable for HEDIS submissions? We'll see. Things are definitely moving, but not. I don't think the timelines are as solid. Phil, what do you think?
I'm not sure that I have a prediction, but I think my sentiment, I got really excited about fire back in like 2019, and I followed it for a long time, and it does feel like something is changing. But to recapitulate some of my family lineage from Missouri, I really want someone to show me in 2026. Like, I want to see it. I want to see the button that I hit and it gives me all the fire, and then I want to see the other button that I hit that makes it in tables.
Show me the data.
Yeah, show me. Like, I want, and I believe, as we know, this is not a technical problem, really. It has a lot to do with like the technology exists. We have the technology. It's about actually making it real. But you, Aaron, you're not getting off the hook.
Oh, no predictions.
No predictions
for me. I asked the question. I don't have to answer it.
Well, two was compatible. Two was compatible with fire, right? Like if you have
totally
data
compatible.
Fire, pump
totally
it in. You guys will take it. You guys will take it in any format.
Yeah. Show me, Aaron. I want to see the connector in Tuva, the fire to Tuva connector.
It's called Fire Inferno. You can go check it out.
I should check it out. I need data to put into it, though. That's the first thing. I need.
Yeah, that's the problem.
I need the fire data to put in.
Let's create the MCP and the agent stuff. Let's have that all be automated. And I think it's possible to do and really cool. And then we can come back on this podcast like in a couple of months and like show it off and be like, hey, it's really working. Phil, look, there's a button.
We'll do it. We'll do a Tuva community meetup on that. Yeah, I'm down.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. I'll fly out.
Well, this was great, guys. Awesome. Glad we got this finally done. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, guys. Thanks a lot.
Great.
All right,
thanks, everybody.